okay out there? Now, you've got to be twice as noisy. There's a lot of people away this morning, so I want you guys to be the noisy ones. Can you do that? Oh, there you go. That's better. So we're looking at this whole subject of the fruit of the Spirit. And what that is basically attributes of God. You know, things that God carries very well. Things like you can see to my left here, kindness, peace, patience. You know, to my right, gentleness, goodness. And in the middle, the subject of today is love. Everyone say love. You did that almost like Barry White, yeah. And isn't it, by the way, isn't it great to have Ibi with us today? I just sat there. She
Morning, people.
She looks all innocent. Wait till she gets, I don't know, that stuff she's got to say to us. You know, we've got enough notes between us to change the world this morning. Eh? And we're gonna start by reading a great passage from the Word of God, which is found in 1 Corinthians 13. A lot of you will have heard this based on you go to weddings as well as I do. I want to read this to you in the Message Bible, which I think puts it in a really great way. Are you ready to hear this? It says this. If I speak with human eloquence and angelic ecstasy but don't love, I'm nothing but the creaking of a rusty gate. If I speak God's word with power, revealing all his mysteries and making everything plain as day, and if I have faith that says to a mountain, jump, and it jumps, but I don't love, I am nothing. If I give everything I own to the poor and even go to the stake to be burned as a martyr, but I don't love, I've got nowhere. Good American quote there. So no matter what I say, what I believe, what I do, I'm bankrupt. You hear me? I'm bankrupt without love. You see, love never gives up. Love cares more for others than for self. Love doesn't want what it doesn't have. Love doesn't strut. Doesn't have a swelled head. Doesn't force itself on others. Isn't always me first. Doesn't fly off the handle. Doesn't keep score of the sins of others. Doesn't revel when others grovel. Takes pleasure in the flowering of truth, puts up with anything, trusts God always, always looks for the best, never looks back, but keeps going till the end. Love never dies. You see, inspired speech will be over someday. Praying in tongues will end. Understanding will reach its limit. We know only a portion of the truth. And what we say about God is always incomplete. But when the complete arrives, our incompletes will be cancelled. When I was an infant at my mother's breast, I gurgled and cooed like an infant. When I grew up, I left those infant ways for good. We don't yet see things clearly. We're squinting in a fog, peering through a mist. But it won't be long before the weather clears and the sun shines bright. We'll see it all then. See it all as clearly as God sees us, knowing him directly just as he knows us. But for now, right now, until that completeness, we have three things to do to lead us towards that consummation. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly. And the best of the three is, and the best of the three is love. Thank you. Well, Libby, I'm going to join you. Have you been making some noises here, or is it something else I can hear? There's something making some noises behind you, is there? Something going on, some gremlins in the system. Well, we won't worry about those. Good. Can you hear me okay out there? Because I can't hear myself, Andy. Whether you can do something about that would be really, really helpful. We've still got noises going on, but don't worry about it. I'm sure it just must be you. You know, when I read that, just let me open this. When I read that passage, I don't know about you, but we tend to associate that passage with weddings, but that really is what I would term the quintessential biblical passage on love, isn't it? It's you can agree with me if you like. It's the thing that we expect to be read at weddings, but reality is that it's not just for weddings. It's the passage for life. It's the epitome of what is written about the whole subject of love. But the reality is we know that love doesn't always look like that, does it? It's okay to say that. It kind of doesn't always look like that. It doesn't always smell like that. It doesn't always sound like that or taste like that or even feel like that. Even though the scripture says, hey, here's the quintessential, have a look at that. This is what love should look like. We know that often it doesn't look like that. You see, when we take the wide angle lens of our camera of life, we know sometimes it's not like that at all. You see, the way of love doesn't always carry the language or the sound of Romeo and Juliet. It doesn't always sound like that. But actually, it sounds more like that creaky gate that we read about in 1 Corinthians 13. And the reality is, if we're very honest with ourselves, not just in our marriages, but in our friendships, in relationships, and in life, it's true that sometimes our love gets a little bit rusty. Wouldn't you agree this morning? And so I was thinking about John chapter 12, and the reality is there's a story about Jesus going to someone's house, and they're basically giving him a meal to honor him, and Mary is there. Now, this is Mary who is the sister of Martha. This is the sister of Lazarus. This is the Mary that we're speaking about. And in this context, Mary comes to Jesus. They're trying to honor him, and she comes with this ointment, this oil, and she begins to put this ointment on the feet of Jesus. And the reason that she did that, one, is because she was showing love to him. Everyone say love. She was showing love to him. She was trying to honor who he was. She was trying to get across to others about this thing that was symbolic or would be symbolic of his death, knowing this whole burial thing that would go on, the fact that Jesus would die for us. There were all kinds of things going on in the fact that she put this ointment on the feet of Jesus. However, here's something I noticed in that story. When she did that, some of the disciples began to kick off. Now, would you ever believe, you think if you were there, would you have kicked off? You know, particularly Judas, he starts saying, why on earth, because this ointment was so expensive, it was really expensive stuff. And he starts saying stuff like, you know, we could have sold that ointment and given it to the poor. All kinds of stuff that you may think is legitimate, or you may be calling Judas this morning. But here's the point, really, that I want to make based on that. The fact that criticism came across, opinions were flying everywhere. But here's my point. This is what happens when our love gets a bit rusty. Hear me. As Jesus followers, let's not point the finger at anybody else this morning. Let's look in the mirror. That actually, when as Jesus followers, our love gets a little bit rusty, or let me put it this way, when we lose our love for something. How many know that sometimes our love gets a little bit rusty, gets a little bit creaky? When our love gets like that, or when we lose our love for something, it's at that point we begin to kick off. It's at that point that we begin to complain. It's at that point that we begin to give opinion on everything, when our love goes a little bit cold, just like the Jesus followers on this day. And here's my answer to that. Here's something that I've thought, when we get a little bit like that, when our love gets creaky, this is what we should do. We should apply some ointment. Hear me. We should apply some oil to our lives. And what does that look like? To me, that looks like getting into the presence of God. That looks like getting in to the presence of God and allowing his love to fill you again. Sometimes when we feel our love has gone as far as it can go, this is why it's the fruit of the Spirit. This is why we can't buy it. This is why it's God's attribute. We need to spend time with God so that when we can't love anymore, we allow God's love to flow through us. You see, it's the fruit of the Spirit, and the fruit is in the root.
Good. Okay, so we're going to keep, funnily enough, on the subject of feet. Sorry if you've got a foot fetish, but not a fetish, but a foot allergy, or not alike. Okay, so I'm going to share a story from the Bible, and it's a story on Jesus' life. And just quickly to say this, we've been looking at REAP, and we've been looking at the fact that this isn't about us striving to love more or be more peaceful or patient. As Dave just said, the fruit is in the root. And the reason that we can use Jesus' life as such a great example of what it looks like to, display the fruit of the Spirit is simply because he was in constant communication and relationship with his Father. He was always close to his Father. So quickly into John 13, I'm just going to read. It says, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave the world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with a towel that he had around him. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You don't understand what I'm doing, but someday you will." And, I just want to ask a question, really. What does love really smell like sometimes? And, for me personally, love is always associated with things like roses and, fine fragrance, Jean Paul Gaultier, whatever your fragrance, whatever your preference. But the truth is, black and white, sometimes love stinks. And, Jesus got on his feet, on his hands and knees, and he washed his disciples' feet. Not something that I would choose to do or like to do. That stench must have been quite overpowering. But he immersed himself into that situation because, as the Bible says, he loved them, and he loved them to the very end. And what he actually wanted to do was he actually wanted to do an act to show them that he loved them despite the stench and despite the stink. Yeah. And, in real life situations and real life seasons of our love for our loved people, loved ones, friends, family, love can actually stink. As parents, changing poo in nappies, cleaning up sick, it stinks. The reality is it does stink. But just because love sometimes stinks, it doesn't mean that it isn't love. Just as an observation, love does sometimes stink.
It's a great point, Ibi. So then let's move on to the thought of what does love look like? Everyone say look. So what does love like, or what is the sight of love? What is the vision of love? Because we look at 1 Corinthians 13 and we see the epitome of love. But the reality is that love doesn't always look like that. Sometimes the vision of love we have isn't so pretty. And everybody said, well, maybe you're not like me then. Sometimes when you look at love, it doesn't look like that incredible view of the mountains and the valleys and the waters and the panoramic view and the crystal waters and all of that stuff. Sometimes love doesn't look like that. Sometimes love for us in our situation looks a little bit more like Billinge Hill on a winter's morning. It looks a little bit misty, looks a little bit foggy. Isn't that true? And we're just trying to be real with you this morning and saying, it's great to read 1 Corinthians 13 and it's like, wow, that's where we want to be. But understanding that, it's only through God, it's only through his fruit that actually we can make it to the epitome of what love really is. And so when we're looking at what love looks like, obviously it doesn't always look like the stuff that we've said. And I was thinking about another situation, again, to do with Jesus in the last book of the Bible, which is Revelation. The one that kind of, when you've read all the way through, very often you don't read the whole thing of Revelation and what this guy John saw, a vision of what would to come and all of that stuff. But in Revelation 3, that Jesus writes, or John writes, but it's the letter of Jesus to the churches. And there's all these different churches, and they're not dissimilar to us. They're all local churches, just like we are. And there's one particular one that I want to pick on and pinpoint this morning that was called the church in Laodicea. Anybody heard of that? And the church in Laodicea, Jesus was writing to this local church like may well have been writing to us. And he's basically saying this to the church: what I'm seeing of your love ain't so pretty. In effect, that's really what he's saying. What I'm seeing of your love ain't so pretty. I wonder if Jesus was to write a letter to TCC, what he would write about our love. As an interesting, maybe we should write the letter. But Jesus was saying that he didn't see so much prettiness about this church in Laodicea. You see, he was saying this: you say as a church that I'm all right, Jack. This is kind of where the church in Laodicea was at. I'm all right, Jack. God was saying to them, you say you're rich. You say that you've got everything you need, but actually you're poor. The reality is what looks good on the surface isn't. It's misty. It's foggy. It's not seeing clearly what I want you to do in exerting that love that I've put inside you. So all of this stuff that he's writing to them, and the answer he says is, what I want you to do, church in Laodicea, maybe church TCC, he says, I want you to put on some eye salve. Just an interesting thing. Another thing to do with ointment, to do with oil, to do with stuff. And he says, I want you to put some eye salve on so that you begin to see things a little bit more clearly. And my observation is this about us in church life, in our lives, in our family lives, when it comes to love and the way that we look at love, when it doesn't look like that view, when it looks more foggy and misty. For me, some of the things that happen sometimes is that we can become a bit wavering in our love. Isn't that true? That we can waver in our love somewhat. My observation is this: when our love is wavering, we get like that. It affects our love. It affects the way that we love. It affects how we see some stuff. Come on. It affects the way that things aren't in clarity. How many know that when you're in mist, when you're in fog, you're a lot more wary of what's going on because you can't really see clearly, maybe fearful, all kinds of stuff that comes on our life that comes in our life at that time is stuff that God doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want it to be in our life. And for me, again, the simple answer, when love gets a bit misty, when love gets a bit foggy, apply some ointment. Apply some eye salve. You want the very simple application this morning, apply some eye salve. And I go directly back to what I said before. What does that actually look like for us? That actually looks like spending some serious time with Jesus. It's like, where did my love go? Why am I feeling like this? Why am I seeing stuff the way that I'm seeing it? Why is it that my love seems to have gone misty and foggy and I can't see my can't see my way through? Well, the answer is because it's misty and foggy. Because maybe we need to spend just a little bit more time with Jesus. Is that okay? Right. Is that all right to say? Is that a good challenge? To think that, if we want the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, well, we need to spend time with the one who is that fruit. We need to spend time in the presence of God. And what happens as we do that, as we spend time with him, our love comes out of the fog and we can see with a little bit more clarity. See, the reality is it's the fruit of the Spirit. It's not our fruit, it's the fruit of the Spirit. And the Bible doesn't say that when we feel like our relationship with God or with others, or our love is fading, or it's foggy, or it's mystery, the Bible doesn't say that we are to come away. It doesn't say that we are to pull away. It says that we're to draw near. Because he says that if we draw near to him, he's going to draw near to us. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick recap just to make sure you're all still with us out there. So we've looked at what love can sometimes sound like, what it can sometimes smell like, what it often looks like in reality. So what does love sometimes taste like? Okay, so again, some of the positive, associations we have there are things like chocolate, chocolada, fine wines, Malbec fan over here, Michelin star, 10-course meals, all the fine dining and all that stuff. But the reality is, I feel, that love can actually be bittersweet. And again, I'm going to share just a follow-on from the story that I shared earlier on. So Jesus has had the Last Supper with his disciples, with his friends, and he's washed the feet. And then just moments after that, he actually goes away from the hustle and bustle. And again, as I mentioned, he goes to spend some key time in his Father's presence and speaking to his Father directly. So I'm just going to read Matthew 26:39. He went on a little farther and bowed his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." And I just find it quite interesting, there in the scripture, the writer actually describes what Jesus is about to go to as a cup of suffering. And, if we're given a cup, it's optional for a start, whether we drink what's in it or not. Do we drink the Kool-Aid, do we not? Yeah, it's optional. But more to the point, would you ever go into a pub and say, "Please, can I have a pint of suffering?" Or to your local coffee shop and say, "Yeah, your finest bitterness, please"? I don't think we ever would do that. But it's so interesting that Jesus understands that his experience and what's up and coming, the reality of the next few moments of his life, are going to be something that is going to taste very bitter but very sweet. And the bitterness for Jesus is the fact that he's about to endure and go to the cross for all of us, and he's going to die. That is something that is ever so bitter. But in him doing that, the sweetness that he's going to enable us to is that we actually get to enter into a relationship with God, enter into a freedom of knowing who his Father is. And that was always God's design. And, we all go through times where we experience stuff in our relationships where, again, it's just bittersweet. So a couple of practical examples, because I like practicality. If you've been pregnant ever, if you've got a child.
No, I've never been pregnant.
I know. Well, are you sure? Okay, so some of the times when we go through pregnancy, for all the mothers out there, pregnancy can be very bitter, as in it's 9 months, you're going to double the size that you are, that you're probably going to be throwing up a lot, that actually at the end of that you're going to endure childbirth, quite horrific. But the sweetness that you get from holding your newborn baby in your arms for the first time, words cannot describe that sweetness. Yeah, so right. Bittersweet. And also, another very, very practical example, someone who loves you, they might want the best for you, for your life. It might be a teacher, it might be a spouse, it might be a friend, anybody. They love you and they want the best for you, and they may challenge you and how you are or the way you live your life or anything like that. And actually, that initial challenge can feel bitter, can leave a bitter taste in your mouth, anger, frustration. But actually, the sweetness comes when we make a decision, which is, I'm going to listen. This could be a turning point in my life. I'm going to listen. I'm going to apply what's been challenged to me, and I might make some changes here. There's a bitterness instantly with the challenge, but what sweet fruit can flow from your life when you make positive change and you become a better, more God-shaped person. I think that's just
it's a great point.
Another observation. So don't give up, basically.
Is that good? I think you should do another.
Yeah, I will do.
All right, then.
Okay. So, okay, we've looked at all those. So my final point really is, what does love really feel like? So this is, another personal story from me. So I always feel that when you start to talk about this stuff and you start to prepare something that you're going to bring to a group of people, the first person who always gets challenged is just the man in the mirror, basically, yourself. So as me and Dave have been meeting, we've been planning some of this stuff that we're going to be chatting around, and I actually got very, very personally challenged by what does love sometimes feel like. So me and my husband, Dearest, my husband Luke, we had a fallout, a tiff. Let's just say things were a little frosty. And I just felt like I didn't really want to spend time with him. I didn't want to be around him. I didn't want to be nice to him. Absolute silent treatment going down in the Evans household. But actually, I came to this huge stark realization, and it was God reminded me that real love overpowers our feelings. So, for me personally, this is what I did. I made a decision. I really didn't want to be nice to him, but I made a decision. I was going to pick up some sweets and pick up a bottle of port. Everyone knows that the way to a man's heart is bad food and something that's probably going to have long-term damage in the future. So I bought him some sweets and I bought him a bottle of port, and then I texted him saying, I'm going to come pick you up and I'll drop you off at work. I picked him up, dropped him off at work, I gave him these gifts, and really, Luke was just so unexpected of what was going to happen. Now, for all of those of you out there who actually know Luke, this might not come as a surprise, but he actually texted me later on in the day saying, I know how much it must have taken for you to deny the fact that you were feeling upset, and you thought about me and you denied your feelings and you showed me that you loved me. And I'm overwhelmed, and I've been crying at my desk, and I thought, it's so normal. He cries every day, but
I sit there hugging him all day.
Yeah, he does. But for me, it really taught me a real lesson. And again, what does love sometimes feel like? And really, the thing is, love sometimes hurts. Yeah. And often we allow our feeling to dictate what we do or don't do, whether we're going to choose to show love or we're not going to choose to show it. If you feel like it, I will. If I feel sad, I won't. But actually, the greatest ever story and the greatest ever example that there ever was of someone denying the way that they felt for the purpose of showing love is truly the story of Jesus. Yeah. So a quick summary of some of the stuff that Jesus, I use the word endured for the sake of us. So he wasn't just hurt emotionally, he was also hurt physically. He was betrayed, he was mocked, he was ridiculed, he was spat at, he was beaten, he was stripped, he was forced to carry a cross that weighed ridiculous amounts of weight on his back for miles upon miles, in which he was actually in turn going to be crucified upon. And he did that. And at not one point did Jesus ever say, it hurts too much. The pain's too much. This doesn't feel like love. In fact, he did all that stuff. He went through all that physical and emotional pain. And the purpose was for love. And he did that because his purpose was always to come for love and to show love.
Great job, eh? That was great, Ibi. You should give it up for Ibi. That's just great points. Really good practical stuff. So we shared some very simple points with you from the life of Jesus. And we're going to pray in a moment. I'd like you to pray with us, actually, if you would. And the thought throughout, I believe, not just through this talk and the things we've shared, but also through the whole morning, is there's been this theme of God's love. And the way that we get that beyond what we have as love, and the way that we show love is to show God's love. It is to carry the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, which comes from Him. And the thought that's kind of been right the way through this gathering this morning is the fact that we only get that as we remain in Him. That it's the remaining and the abiding in Him that allows us to love beyond what we can love. How many have ever come to the point and realized that they just can't love anymore in this situation? and like not really know what to do, to run away, to stay, and I don't just mean in relationships, but in situations. The reality is there's a time where our love comes to an end and we have to draw on the love that God's placed in us. That is the fruit of the Spirit. That's why it's so amazing for us to speak about reap and to have the fruit of the Spirit operating in our lives, because this is something that goes beyond what we are, our strength, our power, and everything that we have. It goes to another level altogether. But it only comes as we remain in Him. It only comes as we actually know Him.